in the year of the Beijing Olympics, Warwick iCast presents a series of perspectives from some of the university's China experts. Using the Nanjing Automotive Rover relationship, Warwick Business School's Professor Simon Collinson is at the Longbridge factory to give his view of the growing economic relations with China.
Some people might say, why worry about China? Well, most people know this is the largest country in the world. There's 1.3 billion people in this nation. Some people also know this is the second largest economy in the world by some reckoning. And a number of people also know that the economy is growing at a massive rate. The scale and the speed of the growth of this economy is unprecedented. We saw something like it in the era when Japan grew, but the size of China and the range of industries across which it's growing is unprecedented. So in effect, you might not need to be worried, but we need to understand what's going on in China, those who are interested in economics or those who are interested in business. We also need to be ready to adapt, to respond to the challenges, the opportunities, the threats that the China challenge represents. So again, possibly not worry, but certainly be prepared to adapt. I've spent the last few years doing a number of research projects on China. I became fascinated after being a specialist on Japan at looking at precisely what was happening in terms of the growth of China and what was generating the growth of competitiveness in Chinese businesses. What we did was we went over to China and we looked at 20 of the largest multinational companies based in China who'd invested in the Chinese region, who had built up collaborative partnerships with Chinese counterparts within China. And what we learned was that those companies that were aware of the success of the Chinese economy, that were monitoring the learning patterns of Chinese firms themselves and were building up partnerships with these firms, were doing the best in terms of two things. Number one, manufacturing and making products in China to export to their markets back in the West, in the UK, in Europe, in the USA. Number two, going over there to sell to the growing market in China. 1.3 billion people, increasing disposable income levels, and a Chinese population that wants to buy Western goods increasingly. So Western firms are pouring investment into China. There's over $65 billion worth of finance going into China every single year. And these Western firms that we looked at were building up collaborative partnerships to learn how to adapt, both to sell in China and to make products to sell to their other economies around the world. I remember one of my earliest memories of landing in Beijing many years ago, and I noticed hundreds of VW Passats. And these were operating as taxis in China. And now VW was one of the earliest firms, one of the earliest car firms to set up and establish a presence in China to sell VWs. And it established a joint venture with Shanghai Automotive Corporation. And just last year, I came landing in Shanghai and I noticed a Rover being advertised, and it turned out to be the Warwick 750, the local version of the Rover. And this is now manufactured by Shanghai Automotive Corporation. Now, VW got into the Chinese market through a joint venture with Shanghai Automotive, but MG Rover has never invested in China. In fact, MG Rover was the subject of a takeover. In 2005, the MG part of MG Rover was taken over by the Nanjing Motor Corporation, and the Rover part was taken over by Shanghai Automotive. And effectively now they have taken lock, stock and barrel the car plant over to Shanghai and are manufacturing over there, and hence selling Warwick 750s, which are a version of the Rover 75. This is Longbridge car plant. Car manufacturing began here in 1905 with the establishment of Austin. Now, British Leyland and MG Motor and MG Rover have established car manufacturing operations here, and it's the heart of one of the most earliest industrial clusters in the automobile industry in the world. Now, Nanjing Automotive Corporation took over MG Rover in 2005, paying £53 million for the company. And you might ask yourself, well, given the company was almost bankrupt and a lot of people in the industry said it was defunct, BMW had owned the company, why do we think the Chinese could turn around this kind of operation? What are the Chinese looking for in their investments in the UK and indeed in Western economies. They have a number of gaps. They're excellent at manufacturing cheaply, but they lack technological expertise, the ability to innovate in process and product development, and they lack brands. They need these kinds of things to build much more advanced manufacturing products and high technology products. And they can get these things by acquiring Western firms. They can take over companies, gain assets, technologies, and brands. And in this case, they're targeting this kind of operation, not just to take over these kinds of things, because they want to sell back in China, in their growing market, their domestic market. They also want to sell over here. And Nanjing Automobile has the aspiration of eventually assembling cars, the MG-TF, over here in the Longbridge plant for sale in the European market. And before it does that, it's got to get the quality, the technology up to scratch. There are now 350 Chinese firms invested in Britain, and foreign direct investment from China into the UK is growing all the time. So how are British firms supposed to react? How do they respond to this new invasion? Well, we've been here before. If you remember Japan in the 1970s and early 1980s, there was a huge influx of foreign direct investment from Japan, particularly into the automobile sector in the UK and into consumer electronics. And some firms went out of business. They were simply outcompeted and knocked out of the marketplace. Other firms adapted and they responded to the threats, the opportunities presented by Japan in that area, and they grew to be stronger. And our research on multinational firms in China, looking at how Western multinationals are learning to innovate with Chinese firms, has shown us that those most successful firms are the ones that learn through partnerships and alliances. They build up a set of complementary capabilities, skills, expertise, assets, ways of innovating that fits with the strengths and weaknesses of Chinese firms. So together, these kinds of partnerships are the way forward for both the Chinese and the British. And as long as the world economy keeps growing at the pace it's growing, as long as there are no major turnarounds economically, politically or socially within China itself, then both countries and firms from each country are set to do very well. If we take Longbridge to be one of the main examples, what does the future hold for British firms and for Western economies in the face of the China challenge? Well, my view is the future is fairly positive. I don't believe Chinese firms are going to be pricing British firms and Western multinationals out of the marketplace. I don't believe they're going to come over and buy up all the assets, all the technologies and all the brands. But there is a huge responsibility on British management, on industrialists, to monitor and understand better the competitive strengths and weaknesses of China, to understand the opportunities that China's change represents. So with all eyes on Beijing with the forthcoming Olympics and China being in the news for good and bad reasons at the moment, I'd urge British managers and industrialists to get over to China, to have a look at what's going on, to look at the source of the threats, the opportunities, the competitive advantages that Chinese firms are building up, and get a deep understanding of how this is going to impact their own businesses, the firms and the economies in the rest of the world in the future to come.